In this video, I'm trying to make sense out of some of the insanest shit in our time. American attempts at democracy. But before we come to that, just a little blurb. Donald Trump? Like, we are living in the Ragnarok. The tree of life burns, Sword, the fire giant, is scorching the earth with his flaming sword. The Jormungandr sea is rising to devour the lands. The soot-red rooster has crowed. The Gjallarhorn is sounding. The world is literally burning. And you want to vote for that degenerate, deranged, climate denialist dork? Are you out of your mind? I just needed to get that off my chest. So this video gives you two, perhaps complementary answers to that wild conundrum of how the festering, flying, that idiot manages to make tens of millions want to vote for him. So 4 years ago, we were in this nerve-wracking wait for the election count that took out Donald Trump, and I spat out a somewhat frenzied reflection about the trollish nature of Trump, which actually inspired some insights in me on how to relate to the trollish. Since then, I've reflected more on this, and here I'll suggest one explanation to why people vote for Trump that is kind of social political, and one that's deeper and more animist and connected to Euro traditional knowledge and the trollish, and that is to view Trump as a carnival king. And I'll suggest a more sustainable solution to the problem, because obviously it's not really a sustainable solution to just elect another slightly more well-spoken ultra-capitalist imperialist with a granted redeeming dash of wokeness, as a president for the United States. So we need a model that addresses the underlying social dynamisms that produce the situation. So this is the video where I analyze Donald Trump and suggest how we can save America from itself. Cool. First, the political social explanation, where I wholeheartedly agree with the late genius David Graeber, the anarchist anthropologist, in his analysis of the culture wars. And in my sort of rephrasing of Graeber's point, it goes something along these lines. There are today two groups of politically polarized people. We could call them the pissed offs and the ever so righteous. I myself and most followers of this channel belong to the last category, the righteous, as you could probably deduct from my little initial outburst of righteous Trump outrage. When we look at the pissed offs, the good news about them is that they're generally pissed off for good reasons. They feel politically disempowered, which they are. Like anybody, they feel sidelined by a cultural middle class, mostly composed by the ever-so-righteous, which they also kind of are. And they feel desperate that the world is going to shit, which it is. The bad news about the pissed-offs is that they are helped by this microscopic billionaire elite to not understand the actual reasons that they're pissed off, but instead look to, infantile fairy tales of conspiracy theories and grotesque buffoons like Donald Trump, rather than to look for the reasons for the actual shit show that we're living in. So, turning to the ever-so-righteous, the bad news is that we, the righteous people, are generally much more interested in affirming and parading to ourselves and each other's our ever-so-righteousness than actually solving problems. The good news is that we generally have a more precise assessment of the problems than the pissed offs, even though we also sometimes veer into sort of weird issues of extremely spurious relevance to our current predicament of accelerating into the total apocalypse. So the reason that the American election looks like some sort of terror attack in a carnival shop of madness is not that Donald Trump is bad. There'll always be bad persons. The real problem is that, obviously, that there are tens of millions of people who are ready to vote for him. So why in the world are people voting for this man? So the reason, according to Graeber, is both simple but also a bit surprising. Trump and similar populist politicians like Boris Johnson, Marine Le Pen, and Viktor Orban from Hungary they play this very straightforward game that actually doesn't target their own voters, which are the pissed offs, right? It targets us, the ever so righteous. So these politicians, they pretend to be idiots and they pretend to be fascist, even though, of course, they aren't idiots. And they also aren't real fascists, actually. Like an actual fascist, that's actually a different thing. But they play a game of signaling these things in these boisterous, buffoony ways that give us, the ever so righteous, exactly what we want. The possibility of feeling ever so righteous and parading that, signaling it. And that is what many of us crave more than solving problems, which is difficult and uphill work. So Trump performs to be this sort of fascist idiot. He says random infantile shit all the time, and then the ever so righteous, us, we revel in ridiculing him. Look at Jon Stewart. Evening after evening after evening in this particular horror-mixed hilarity of some other outrageous shit that Trump pulled. It's incredibly boring. Trump behaved like an outrageous twat again. But that Stewart's reaction is actually where Trump's real campaign is playing out. It's not in him being an outrageous twat, which by now should be kind of yesterday's news, but in the ever so righteous reacting to that, because that reaction gives the pissed offs exactly what they want. It pisses them off. They feel that the whole thing, this mocking of Trump, is targeting them. And this is where Trump is indeed kind of a Christ-like nature. He symbolically takes onto himself. He embodies the feelings of plight that this group of people have. And he chooses to be the victim of this constant, jubilantly self-absorbed mocking of the ever so righteous. Everybody gets what they want the most. We get to feel ever so righteous while not addressing the problems. And they, the pissed offs, get what they want. They get to be pissed off without addressing the problems. And there's a mutual interdependence in these reaction patterns that drives the whole cataclysmic idiocy. So that is one basic reason that people vote for Donald Trump. We, the ever so righteous, convince them, the pissed off, so we piss them off by mocking Trump so they feel that they're getting back at us by voting for him. That's Graeber's analysis, and I think it's pretty spot on. But there's also a deeper, more cultural reason, and that is where animist knowledge becomes relevant, and it has to do with monarchy and democracy. Now, I believe that Trump has taken the role of a carnival king. So what do I mean by that? The carnival king is a figure from medieval European carnival ceremony, where the world is temporarily inverted in order to be renewed. Everybody takes to the streets and dress up in crazy costumes and behaves in wild, transgressive ways. So that's the carnival, this interim space where chaos is allowed to reign, social order is inverted, and social hierarchies are often dissolved. That in-between space that historians of religion call liminal. And because it poses this playful space that challenges power, this cultural space has traditionally been owned by the political left. So this, for instance, is why Labor Day is located on May Day. Like Carnival, May Day is a liminal transition. It is a fissure, I would say, in the law of the land, where you could say that rebellion is meaningful on May Day. But what has happened today is that Trump has moved ownership over the liminal, the inverted space, into the right wing. So while the left has been tied to this sort of normativity today, and that creates a new polarization between these two cultural and political spaces. Now, in cultural history, these liminal spaces where Trump is sort of putting his hand is, they have typically presided over or been presided over by play kings and May queens and May counts and so on. Most iconically, the Carnival King, who, after the carnival was conducted in medieval Europe, he would be ceremonially brought to trial and convicted in the ceremonial reinstallment of normalcy, social hierarchy, and social order. And Trump is such a figure, an outrageous, transgressive, liminal clown ruler, a carnival king, and he has ruled over this typically inverted, insane interregnum. But, as I've already mentioned on this channel, this carnival king nature of Trump actually holds a real potential for an actual shift into American monarchy. Because exactly such play kings and carnival rulers, they might historically have been at the roots of actual monarchy. And this is part of the process where we, in the Western civilization, get stuck in one static social form rather than letting our social forms move with the law of the land, as it would be suggested by traditional knowledge. You might say that Trump doesn't appear particularly regal, but you're actually wrong about that. Kings used to be seen as the foundation of law, and therefore they were beyond the law. So they did their worst to be outrageous. Trump is carnivalesque in exactly that sense. He has exactly this grotesque, excessive, abusive, sort of violent character that is typical of the kings of old, who had myriads of children and they lovers and they liked to eat, fight and fuck, and they would randomly command off with the head. Trump fires his closest advisors on a whim. It's very Henry VIII, actually. Kings happily parade how they're much more invested in their pastime sports than in the running of a country. In the old days, it wasn't golf, but rather hunting or falconry or something like that. And like the old-time kings, he's more than happy to put millions of human lives at stake just to not lose face in whatever issue. In the old days, this played out around like dynastic ownership over this or that plot of land, or ideas of honor, or feudal power navigation, and so on. Today, it's more about making people believe that elections only count if he wins, and these kind of half-hearted attempts to overthrow the American democracy and so on. Donald Trump is not just regal, he is iconically regal. In a sense, he's more monarchic than actual monarchs today. And I think that is a reason that this man yields this attraction. He's evidently a buffoonish ass, and he can literally not say two sentences without projecting that. And from the monarchical position, that is exactly why people are attracted to him. He explicitly just says, fuck democracy, in a situation where you could argue that this liberal capitalist democracy has indeed failed the minimum promise to, secure livable futures for our children. And I think that it's probably that monarchies are, in a sense, or are experienced as very evident ways of running human communities. Right? You have a dude and he calls the shots and that's it. So I think there's something deep inside Western civilization and Western culture that recognizes Trump in all his grotesquerie as a quintessential monarch. And notice also that the devotion to Trump, it has a completely different nature than the electorate of other candidates. Like even the most weirdo American Republicans who believe that automatic rifles should be freely available to confuse teenagers, and if someone kindly offers them a little bit of healthcare security, then it's probably some sort of satanical scheme. Like even them, they wouldn't have thought about Ronald Reagan or George Bush as a messiah, right? But that's exactly how many think of Trump. It's a religious devotion, and that actually makes a lot of sense because the kind of leaders that grow out of the carnival, the liminal, they are often prophets and god kings, because this liminality that Trump draws on, that can often give birth to a specific kind of movements that want to change things. Now, historically, this has mostly been the case in the left wing. Socialism has often produced liminal movement, these kind of, and sometimes very violent movements. Also, decolonial movements typically emerge around these prophetic and charismatic leaders. So the shift into a kind of American neo-monarchy actually seems to be really at stake in this election. And as opposed to this carnival insanity, birthing some insane, apocalyptic anti-order of sorts, Kamala Harris appears eminently conservative. She seems like some sort of charismatic high school principal. She literally reminds me of my aunt, actually, like a Professor McGonagall in Hogwarts. A little bit strict, but also kind and sweet and well-meaning and good-spirited and straighter than the Archimedean concept of the shortest route between 2 points. Now, we all pray and hope that she wins, but it's not a sustainable solution to the deep cultural dynamisms that are dismantling American democracy in order to produce this total apocalypse that Trump's fanatical Christian right base so longs for. Because Harris is also normalcy. Where Trump is a full-blown like plunge into the Ragnarok, she's the status quo. And who want to buy the status quo in the middle of the Ragnarok? Where status quo is just a continued acceleration into total apocalypse. She's likely to do little or nothing to balance the wild economic disparities of our time, the structural power asymmetries. Will she even try to decrease the intensity of the degenerate idiocy of the wars going on in Gaza and Ukraine? And this, of course, makes a couple of things explicit. One, that this centrist liberal pseudo left wing, having become the guardian of normativity today, also now guards the violence of normativity. So insanely, the people speaking against war today, they're often the extreme right. The only people trying to stop the madness of a potential nuclear conflict about 1 day's drive east of where I'm sitting right now is the ultra-right wing. Like, what the hell just happened to the world? Like, did Hannibal Lecter just go and become vegan or what? And it also shows the tragedy of the politics of our age, because of course any idiot can see that the status quo isn't good enough. The status quo is still an accelerating decline into the Ragnarok, just at a somewhat less steep decline than the one Donald Trump is offering, which is an unhinged plunge. But of course, it's also important to take that, the less steep decline, because it gives us a little bit of time. So as the world prays to all our different gods, that Americans won't just say, fuck everything and let's go with neo-monarchic apocalypse insanity rather than old school retarded imperialist capitalism, then let us just remember that it's not a solution. You know, the dynamisms that drive Trump springs from Harris. He is the result of a system she is struggling so hard to preserve. So if Harris wins and we can perhaps breathe a bit lighter, then we're still in the same situation. Trump or someone worse will come. It's a given. And as I've already mentioned in my last Trump election video, I think that the underlying cultural wisdom is that the left wing must move back into relation with the carnival, the liminal space. We do not shape the world without being in relation with chaos, with those trolls. So some sort of relation will have to be built, not with Trump himself, who's a ridiculous phenomenon, but with those underlying cultural dynamisms that drive Trump. It is iconic that the Carnival King is characteristic of one of the most oppressive times in European history, the Christian Middle Ages, where the Carnival King is convicted. It is a conflictual, oppressive conceptualization, and that's exactly the note that Kamala Harris struck in her announcing her presidency speech there. There was a supporter shouting, "Lock him up," which I kind of agree with on one level. I mean, Trump is a criminal, but if we forget about the individual for a moment, Trump, and look at the cultural dynamisms that are driving him, those deep cultural drives that converge into Trump, the great troll, the Carnival King, traditional knowledge would suggest building relation with them, being more pagan and less Christian, more Viking and less medieval Catholic. If we are to avert some sort of violent implosion, then we need to build relation to this liminality, these trolls. We must make babies with them, perhaps even learn something from them. And this means recanting on our craving for feeling ever so righteous all the time. It means shifting out of that game, which is actually Trump's game, that we are essentially also playing with our incessant focus on signaling. That's what both these parts of the culture war, where they're identical. It's all about signaling all the time, but we need to open actual dialogues with other. And as it happens, I have exactly the social tool that America needs. So if you happen to know someone influential, then please send them this video. Here's a message for the American establishment. Many have compared Donald Trump to Hitler, and I think it's crap. Hitler was much sharper and much more driven and much more uncompromising than Trump. You haven't seen a Hitler yet, but that day may very well come, and it may come sooner than we think, where some young, dynamic, ultra-intelligent, charismatic fascists goes and becomes the Jesus to Trump's John the Baptist. And on that day, we are all fucked. So here's a suggestion for how to decrease the chance that this day comes. It is a model that I think can save America from itself or from descending into conflict. The suggestion is one specific model for popular education, the model that spread like a wildfire through Scandinavia in the 19th century and gave shape to this very affluent and functional and socially progressive part of the world. The Nordic folk school model, as it has already been introduced in America through the civil rights movement, actually. You just needed more. So all these tens of millions of Americans who believe in this insane phenomena of Trump as some sort of messiah, that would actually never happen in a Nordic country like, say, Sweden. If you compare, what you see is actually that Kamala Harris looks pretty much like the Donald Trumps you find in Sweden. The difference that's approximately the difference. And the reason is that Nordic countries like Sweden has had this self-organized popular education movement where normal people dialogue themselves towards critically relating to their world and their communities and its trends. So, if you're an American influential person who wants to save your country from imploding, then there are some people that I want you to pick up the phone and give a little call. For instance, the Danish thinker Lene Rakel Andersen, but there are also other good people out there in the Nordic folk school movement. These people have the medicine that America needs. It has been tried, it does work, but someone important, please hear this message, because unfortunately, America imploding is not just America's problem, it's a problem for all of us. So please consider implementing this, and there's not a moment to lose. It can be done even if Trump wins the election, as I'm making this video. So there's also some good news, and that is that you are America. Try to read the article by the Canadian anthropologist Wade Davis about the capacity of Americans to produce change when the shit is hitting the fan. The capacity of exactly Americans to pick up and change stuff is amazing. So show this to someone and let's get to work in preventing this absolute insanity from destroying the world. Thanks for listening.